His hand slid slowly under my dress, tracing a path of shivers along my thighs. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the warmth of his body consume me. His kiss grew more urgent, deeper. As he began to undress me, I could already feel his pants shifting. But let me take you back to how it started. My name is Claire. I've been married for 5 years to Mark, a good man. He works in tech, travels a lot for work, and takes care of us. We live in a modest apartment building just outside Austin, Texas. It's quiet. Neighbors smile, hold the door, but don't talk much.
Hey, Laura here. Just a quick note before we dive deeper into Claire's story. This episode is more than just drama. It's a chance for you to hear real-life emotional English, how native speakers express feelings, tension, and relationships. At the end of the story, stick around for our language takeaway. I'll highlight useful expressions you can use in your own writing, and you'll get 5 shadowing situations to help you practice speaking fluently. All right, let's get back to Claire. Part 1.
One of those neighbors is Julian. He lives across the hall. A quiet man, early 30s, tall, calm. He works from home. An architect, I think. Sometimes I see him on his balcony, sketching or staring into the distance. We've never had a real conversation, just polite nods, casual greetings. Until that day. Mark had been gone for 2 nights, away at a tech conference in San Diego. I was home alone, doing laundry and trying to beat the heat. It was one of those still, silent days where even the air feels heavy. I had just put some towels in the washer when I noticed something strange. The kitchen floor felt cold, too cold. When I looked down, I saw a thin layer of water spreading out from under the sink. I opened the cabinet door, and panic hit me. A pipe was leaking, badly. Water was pouring out fast, soaking the inside of the cabinet, dripping onto the floor, and running toward the hallway. I grabbed some towels to try and block it, but it was no use. The water kept coming. I grabbed my phone and called the emergency repair number listed by the landlord. The woman who answered sounded stressed. She said they were dealing with 3 other flooding calls already, and couldn't send anyone until the next morning. I stood there, ankle deep in water, unsure what to do. That's when I heard a soft sound, someone stepping onto the hallway outside. I walked to the door and opened it. Julian was standing just outside, leaning against the railing of the balcony with a coffee mug in one hand and a pen tucked behind his ear. He looked like he'd just stepped away from his desk. I paused for a second. Then I said, "Hi. Sorry to bother you, but I have a big problem. My kitchen is flooding and the repair service can't come until tomorrow." He blinked, surprised, then nodded. I said, "I know you work from home and I don't want to bother you, but do you know anything about plumbing?" He gave a small smile and replied that he wasn't a plumber, but he could take a look. I stepped aside and let him in. The moment he walked past me, I felt a strange shift in the air. Not tension, just awareness. The kind of energy that hums quietly, in the background but demands attention. He crouched down in front of the sink and examined the pipe. Then he asked if I had a wrench. I nodded, found one in the kitchen drawer, and handed it to him. Our fingers touched for just a second, barely noticeable. But I felt it. Julian got to work, tightening the pipe, wiping the area with a kitchen towel. I stood near the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to stare at the way his sleeves were rolled up, the way his focus never wavered. Then he looked up at me and said softly, "You should be careful walking barefoot on wet tiles." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. It wasn't flirtation. It was something quieter, something heavier. I mumbled that I'd go get the mop and walked into the next room, my heart beating faster than it should have been. When I returned, he was standing up, wiping his hands on a towel. He said the pipe was sealed for now, and that the water should stop leaking. As he handed me the towel, I remember saying something without thinking, just to fill the silence. I told him my husband was away on a work trip and wouldn't be back until the weekend. Maybe I said that to let Julian know why I needed his help, or maybe I just wanted to explain why I was dealing with the flood alone. I thanked him, avoiding his eyes. He gave a nod, walked toward the door, and paused. Just for a second. Like there was more he wanted to say. But he didn't. He just gave me a faint smile and left. I closed the door and stood there, mop in hand, staring at the floor that was still damp and shining in the afternoon light. Nothing had happened. And yet, I knew something had changed. That night I lay in bed thinking about Julian, about how calm he had been, about the way his voice had sounded in my kitchen, about how I had suddenly become aware of a man I had barely noticed before. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt something shift? Just from a look or a moment. That caught you off guard? If you have, type "I know that feeling" in the comments. I didn't know what this meant yet. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing. Julian was no longer just the quiet neighbor across the hall.
Part 2.
Mark came home that afternoon, just like I'd told Julian he would. He walked in with a tired smile, hugged me for a few extra seconds and said, "It's good to be home." I smiled, hugged him back, and for a moment, I let myself believe that was enough. We spent the evening on the couch, eating takeout from his favorite Thai place and watching the local news. Mark likes staying updated, just the headlines. He wasn't into movies or fiction or shows. He said he didn't have the time. He didn't really read much either. No music playlists. No camping trips or game nights or hobbies. He worked. That was who he was. Focused, steady, quiet. He told me about the conference, about the speakers, the tech demo that crashed mid-presentation, the bad hotel coffee. I laughed when I was supposed to, nodded along, asked polite questions. He talked for maybe 10 minutes, then leaned back into the couch and pulled out his phone to check an email. That was our rhythm. Most evenings, we'd share a few sentences before one of us disappeared. Him into his laptop, me into bed. He wasn't unkind. He was just always tired, always plugged into something else. Mark was the kind of man who stayed up late working while I curled under the covers alone. Some nights, he wouldn't come to bed until 1 or 2 a.m. Other nights, he'd doze off on the couch with his laptop still open on his chest. He wasn't cold, just disconnected. Not from anything specific, just from the world outside his work. He didn't notice that I'd cleaned the apartment, or that I'd worn the dress he once said I looked beautiful in. And I didn't point it out, because what was the point? Later that night, I lay in bed beside him while he scrolled through work messages, his face lit by the cold glow of his screen. He finally said goodnight, kissed my forehead, and rolled over. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. Just quiet. Like I was shrinking into something I didn't choose. The days that followed passed like soft gray clouds. Nothing loud, nothing sharp. Mark woke up early, showered, made coffee, and left with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He'd kiss my cheek, ask if I needed anything, and be gone before I fully opened my eyes. I tried to keep busy. Laundry, groceries, dishes. I filled the hours with small tasks, trying to feel useful. Whole afternoons would pass before I realized I hadn't spoken a single word out loud. Then came the morning on the balcony. I was hanging laundry in my robe, still barefoot, hair half tied back. The sun was already warming the railings. The smell of fabric softener clung to the air. I felt it before I saw it, like a current of electricity brushing against my skin. I turned my head, and there he was. Julian, on his own balcony, a notebook in his lap, pen in hand. His coffee sat beside him on the small table. He looked up, surprised to see me. Then he smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't flirtatious, but it landed like a spark in my chest. He said good morning. I replied, my voice softer than I meant it to be. We didn't speak much, just a few words. But the silence between those words, it was full, weighted, like something unspoken had followed us from my kitchen into the open air. Then he said, almost in passing, that he'd heard laughter from my apartment the night before, that it sounded like we'd had a good evening. I hesitated. Then I said, "Yeah, Mark's a good man." He nodded, said, "That's good," and went back to his notebook. But I stood there frozen, towel in hand, wondering why my heart had started racing over a conversation that lasted less than 30 seconds. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment so simple it shouldn't mean anything, but somehow you carry it with you all day? If that's ever happened to you, type "I've been there" in the comments. Later that night, Mark worked late again. He said he had something due early the next morning. I told him I'd wait up, but by 11 I went to bed alone. I lay there, in the dark, eyes wide open, and thought about Julian. Not because of what he said, but because of how he made me feel seen, without saying much at all.
Part 3.
It happened on a Wednesday night. Mark had come home late from work, exhausted. I'd kept dinner warm for him, but by the time he finally walked through the door, he looked like he could barely stand. We ate quietly. He barely touched his food. Said he'd had back-to-back meetings all day and that his head was pounding. I offered him a massage, but he just smiled softly and said he needed sleep. By 9:30, he was already snoring on the couch. I sat beside him for a while, flipping, through a magazine I didn't care about, the hum of the refrigerator louder than my own thoughts. The apartment felt warmer than usual, maybe the leftover summer heat, maybe something else. Eventually, I got up to wash the dishes, moving slowly, trying not to wake him. But even with the kitchen clean, I still felt restless. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't settle. So I stepped out onto the balcony. It was quiet outside. Just a few faint crickets and the occasional car passing in the distance. The air was cooler now, but still heavy, like something was hanging in it. And that's when I saw him. Julian was on his balcony. He sat on a wooden stool, barefoot, cradling a mug of tea in both hands. Next to him, a sketch pad lay closed on the small table, with a pencil resting across the cover, like he'd been drawing earlier, but had paused to take in the night. He looked up, noticed me, and didn't seem surprised. It was as if he'd been waiting for this silence to find us again. He gave me a soft nod, then lifted his mug slightly in a kind of quiet toast. I smiled faintly, stepping forward to lean on the railing. I asked what kind of tea it was. He said chamomile, something to help wind down after a long day. Then he asked if I couldn't sleep. I told him the apartment felt stuffy, too quiet in all the wrong ways. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, gently, he said, "You've been different lately." His voice wasn't accusing, it was calm, observant. I gave a small laugh, light, almost awkward, and told him he was imagining things. But he didn't look away. "No," he said, "I'm not." His eyes stayed on mine. Not sharp, not demanding, just steady, honest. Then he said my name. Claire. It sounded different coming from him. Like it carried weight. Like it meant something more. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a warning. It was a crossing. A moment with no return. I looked back at him, my fingers curled slightly around the metal railing. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. But we both knew what was hanging in the space between us. Then, the sliding door behind me opened. I flinched. Mark's voice, groggy and low, asked if I was outside. I turned immediately, heart pounding, trying to sound casual. I told him it was warm inside, and I just needed some air. He rubbed his face, yawned, and told me to come to bed. I nodded, said I'd be in shortly, and stepped back inside, closing the balcony door behind me. But not before I looked at Julian one last time. He was still sitting there, still holding his tea, still watching. That moment, it didn't go away. It didn't fade like a passing thought. It stayed. And let me ask you something. Have you ever stood at the edge of something and known one more step would change everything? If that's you, type, "I've felt that edge," in the comments. That night, as I lay beside Mark, wide awake, I didn't feel guilty. Not yet, but I knew I wasn't the same, because nothing had happened, and yet everything already had.
Part 4.
After that night on the balcony, everything changed, or maybe it didn't. Maybe everything just became visible. I told myself it was nothing, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just a quiet conversation with a neighbor under the stars. But the problem with those kinds of moments is, they don't stay where you leave them. The next morning, I avoided the window. I avoided the hallway. I even avoided my own reflection. Mark left early for work, kissed me on the cheek, told me to have a good day, and was gone before I had my second sip of coffee. I stood by the sink for a while, staring at the teacup I hadn't washed from the night before. I told myself I was overreacting, that Julian was just being kind, that I'd simply enjoyed being seen for a change. That's all it was. A little attention. Nothing dangerous. But even as I told myself that, I was aware of every sound in the hallway, every step, every door. And the worst part? He didn't knock. Julian didn't come by, didn't message, didn't appear. And somehow that made it worse. Because even when he wasn't there, I felt him. A day passed, then another. I tried to distract myself with small things, organizing the pantry, wiping down perfectly clean countertops, scrolling my phone without reading anything. I stopped stepping out, onto the balcony. I kept the curtains closed. I told myself it was better this way, that I had imagined the connection, that I had only wanted to feel something. Then, on the third afternoon, there was a knock. My heart jumped before I could stop it. I walked slowly to the door and opened it. Julian stood there, holding a small brown box. He said it had been delivered to his door by mistake. It had my name on it, an Amazon package. I thanked him quickly, tried to keep the door only half open. But before I could close it, he spoke again. He said my name, just once. Claire. And I froze. His voice wasn't loud. It was low, careful, but it hit harder than if he had shouted. He looked at me and said, "You've been avoiding me." I forced a light laugh. Told him I'd just been busy. That work had piled up. Errands, chores, the usual. He didn't move. Then look at me and say that. I did. Slowly, hesitantly, and it was a mistake. Because when I met his eyes, everything I had been trying to push down came flooding back. The stillness, the warmth, the way I had felt seen, for the first time in what felt like years. Julian didn't reach for me. He didn't touch me. But something inside me cracked open anyway. Let me ask you something, just between us. Have you ever tried so hard to pretend something didn't exist, only to realize it was already living inside you? If you've ever felt that type, I couldn't ignore it in the comments. Julian didn't say anything else. He just gave a quiet nod and stepped back. I closed the door, package still in my hands, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. I leaned against it, eyes closed, breath caught somewhere between fear and longing. This wasn't about betrayal. Not yet. This was about recognition, about what happens when someone sees a version of you that even you had forgotten was there. And I didn't know what was coming next. But I knew one thing. I had already stopped being the woman I was before I opened that door.
Part 5.
Mark left for a weekend work trip on Friday morning. He kissed me goodbye before sunrise, his tie slightly crooked, coffee half drunk. He looked tired, like always. He said he'd be back Sunday night and reminded me to water the plant by the window, something I'd never forget. But he always mentioned anyway. Then he was gone, and the apartment was quiet again. I spent most of that morning pretending not to notice how empty it felt. I folded laundry, answered emails I'd been ignoring, cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. But no matter how much noise I made, the silence underneath it was louder. I didn't see Julian all day. Not in the hallway. Not on his balcony. Not even a sound from across the hall. And maybe that was what made me do it. Around 6 p.m., I stepped out to check the mailbox. A small package was sitting outside my door. No delivery alert, no knock. Just there. My name printed clearly on the label. And as I bent to pick it up, his door opened. Julian stood there. No words, no pretense. Just him. Barefoot, a dark gray t-shirt, soft eyes like he'd been expecting this quiet moment to show up eventually. He nodded at the package in my hand and smiled slightly. "I guess that one was actually meant for you," he said, a gentle callback to our last meeting. I gave a small laugh, the kind that barely escapes your lips. He paused, then added, "You doing okay?" I nodded, but he didn't look away. "You don't have to pretend," he said. "Not with me." I swallowed. The air felt warmer than it should have. My skin buzzed. Then he stepped back and opened his door a little wider. "Would you like to come in for a bit?" It was so casual, so quiet. He didn't lean in, didn't reach out. He just waited, and I didn't say yes. I didn't nod. I just moved. I stepped into his apartment. It was dim and warm, lit by a single lamp in the corner and the last light from the window. Soft music played low in the background, piano, gentle and slow. There was a glass of red wine already poured on the table, and another one empty beside it. He picked it up, filled it halfway, and handed it to me. We sat on the couch, a cushion of space between us. I took a sip. He did too. We didn't talk, and that silence, the one I used to fear, now felt like permission. After a while, he turned toward me, slow and still. His hand moved, resting lightly on mine. I didn't pull away, not this time, and when he leaned in, I met him halfway. The kiss wasn't hungry. It wasn't desperate. It was deliberate. Every movement said, "We knew this was coming." His hand brushed my cheek, my jaw, then the side of my neck. I felt his breath before I felt his lips again, and I let go. Of questions, of guilt, of pretending. He stood first and reached for my hand. I followed him. His bedroom was quiet, clean, the sheets soft and cool. We didn't speak as we undressed each other. We didn't rush. We took our time, because nothing about this had been fast. This was slow, long, growing. We had crossed the line long ago. This was just the first time we let ourselves feel it. Let me ask you something. Seriously, right now, have you ever tried to hold back a feeling for so long that when you finally gave in, it didn't even feel like a choice? If that's you, just type "I let go" in the comments. Later, as we lay there, his hand on my shoulder, our legs tangled under the sheet, I felt still, not peaceful, not sure, just still. Then, a knock at the door. 3 slow, firm knocks. Julian didn't move, but I sat up, heart racing. Then came the voice. "Julian, it's Mark. Have you seen Claire?" Time stopped. Everything I thought I had left behind came crashing back with those 7 words. Mark was home. Early. Looking for me, and I was here in another man's bed.
Part 6.
I didn't move at first. Neither did Julian. We just stared at each other in the low light of his bedroom, the weight of Mark's voice filling every inch of space. "Julian, it's Mark. Have you seen Claire?" I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The sheet clutched against my chest like it could somehow protect me from what I'd done. Julian sat up too, legs over the side of the bed, calm in a way I couldn't understand. I whispered, "Why is he back?" Julian shook his head, still quiet. Maybe the trip was canceled. Maybe he wanted to surprise you. I covered my mouth with my hand. My brain felt slow, disconnected, like I was watching someone else's disaster play out in real time. Another knock. "Claire?" Mark's voice was closer now, right outside the door. My breath caught. I could barely think. Julian stood and began picking up my clothes from the floor, one piece at a time. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at me with panic or judgment. Just a quiet understanding, like he already knew this moment was coming. I slipped on my clothes quickly, fumbling with buttons and zippers, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my shoes. Julian moved toward the door, paused, and looked back at me. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "Just go." I nodded, trying to breathe, trying to stop the shaking in my hands. I opened the bedroom door slowly, listening for any sound in the hallway. Silence. I stepped out, barefoot, my heart thudding so loud I thought it would give me away. I opened the front door of Julian's apartment just enough to peek into the hallway. It was empty. Mark must have gone back across the hall. I moved fast, crossed the short distance with quiet steps, and slipped into my own apartment. The door clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against it, eyes closed. I was home, but I didn't feel safe. Mark called out from the kitchen. "Hey, I didn't see you earlier. Were you out somewhere?" My mouth felt dry. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Yeah." I went down to the mailbox. "Didn't realize you were back." He appeared around the corner, setting his bag down by the table. "Flight got changed. I figured I'd beat the rush and get home early." He smiled at me. Just smiled. And I nodded, like everything was fine. Like I wasn't coming back from another man's bed. Like the last hour of my life hadn't cracked something I could never fully glue back together. We went through the motions. He unpacked his bag. I asked if he wanted tea. He said no. He had a headache and needed to lie down. He didn't question the sweat on my skin. He didn't notice my trembling hands. And part of me hated how easy it was to lie. That night, Mark went to bed early. He didn't ask how my day was. Didn't ask where I'd been. Just brushed his teeth, set his alarm, and kissed my forehead before disappearing beneath the covers. Let me ask you something. Have you ever told a lie so quiet, so small, that no one even noticed it, except you? If you know that feeling, type, "It stayed with me," in the comments. I took a shower and stood under the water for longer than I needed to. I watched the steam fog up the mirror, hoping I could somehow disappear into it. But my reflection stayed, and so did the guilt. When I finally crawled into bed beside Mark, he was already asleep. His breathing was even, peaceful. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Julian's voice. The knock at the door. Mark's name outside a place he never should have been. Nothing had been spoken, nothing confessed, but something had changed. Because this wasn't a secret anymore. This was real, and it was mine.
Part 7.
The thing about guilt is, it never shows up when you expect it. It doesn't knock loudly or crash in like thunder. It lingers, quiet, heavy, patient. The next morning, I woke before Mark. The sunlight leaking through the curtains felt too bright, too honest. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around the mug, just listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mark walked in, still half asleep. He kissed my cheek and asked if I slept okay. I nodded and asked the same. He said yes, then opened his laptop before even touching his coffee. And that was it. That was our entire conversation for the morning. 10 words. Maybe 11. I could have told him everything. Right there. I could have said it all, but I didn't. Because how do you even start a sentence like that? Hey, while you were away, I slept with the man across the hall. Instead, I told him I was going to vacuum the bedroom and wash the sheets, and he said okay, without looking up. That afternoon, while he took a call in the living room, I stepped out onto the balcony. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before everything changed. And there he was. Julian. He stood on his balcony, facing away from me, arms resting on the railing, head tilted slightly like he was listening to the wind. He didn't turn right away, just stayed still, like he felt me before he saw me. Then he looked over his shoulder. Our eyes met, and in that moment, every part of me wanted to run, back inside, back in time, back to when things were simple. But I didn't move. Neither did he. He raised his hand slowly, not a wave, just acknowledgement, like, I see you. I remember too. I nodded, barely, then stepped back and closed the balcony door behind me. I leaned my forehead against the glass, chest tight, breath shallow. Mark's voice drifted in from the other room, still talking work, still in his world. And I stood there between them, one man who didn't notice I was disappearing, and another who saw right through me. I thought maybe the guilt would fade, that it would settle like dust and eventually blow away. But it didn't. It followed me into every room, every glance, every silence between me and my husband. Mark didn't notice the difference. He didn't ask why I was quiet at dinner, or why I left the table early. He didn't notice the new distance. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to ask. That night, as I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling while he drifted off to sleep, I felt something shift inside me. Not regret, not sorrow, something colder. Like a part of me had quietly stepped away, turned its back, and walked into a part of myself I didn't recognize. And maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you felt it too. That moment when something inside you starts to fade, and no one notices. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, type, I started to disappear in the comments. The next morning, I passed Julian in the hallway. He was unlocking his door just as I came out with the trash. He looked up. His eyes searched mine for something. Guilt, maybe. or apology. But I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't say anything. I walked past him like he was anyone, like I hadn't memorized the shape of his hands or the sound of his breath in the dark. But even as I moved past him, I could feel it. That invisible thread still pulling at the space between us. And I hated how real it still was. Because pretending it never happened didn't make it untrue. It just made me lonelier.
Part 8.
The rain started around midnight. It tapped against the windows like a soft warning. I lay in bed beside Mark, watching shadows slide across the ceiling, listening to the sound of water moving down the gutters outside. He was already asleep, his breathing slow, familiar. I rolled onto my side and looked at him, and I wondered if he could feel how far I'd drifted, if he could sense the space between us, even with our bodies just inches apart. The room felt full of things we never said, questions we didn't ask, answers we didn't want to hear. I got up without waking him and walked into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, the condensation cool against my fingertips. And then, like I knew it would happen, I stepped out onto the balcony. The air smelled like wet concrete and warm leaves. It was the kind of night that should have felt peaceful, but I didn't feel peace. I felt exposed, like the rain was washing away everything I'd been trying to hide. Across the courtyard, Julian's balcony light was on. I didn't expect to see him, but he was there. He stood just behind the screen door, holding a mug in his hands, the soft yellow light catching his face. He stepped out slowly, like he wasn't sure if he should. But when he saw me, he didn't hesitate. He just looked. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just let the silence stretch. He rested one hand on the railing, tea still in the other. Then he said, "You look tired." It wasn't meant to hurt. It wasn't cruel. It was true. I nodded. He didn't push. He just stood there, quietly, like he always had. Then I spoke. My husband doesn't know, and maybe he never will. Julian didn't react. He just listened. I took a breath. I'm not going to leave him, I said. Not because I don't feel something here, but because I can't live two lives. I barely know how to live one. The rain softened to a mist, a gentle rhythm around us. He said, "I understand." No anger, no pressure. Just those two words. And they broke something in me. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't looking for a second life. I was just trying to remember who I used to be. Before the loneliness, before the silence, before the distance between me and the man I married became something I stopped trying to cross. I looked at Julian and I said, "I'm sorry." He nodded. Me too. There was no kiss. No dramatic goodbye. Just two people standing in the rain, letting go of something that never really belonged to either of them. I stepped back inside and closed the door, wiped the water from my arms, turned off the kitchen light, and crawled back into bed. Mark stirred slightly, murmured something about the window being open. I said I closed it. He reached for my hand under the covers and laced his fingers with mine, and I held on. Not because I was sure, but because I wasn't ready to lose anything else. And if you're still here, still listening, let me ask you one last thing. Have you ever had to make a choice that left you both broken and whole at the same time? If you've lived that kind of ending, type "I chose quietly" in the comments.
Hey, it's Laura. Claire's story was quiet, intimate, and full of unspoken tension. Maybe it reminded you of something in your own life, or maybe it just pulled you in and made you feel something you didn't expect. Now, I want to help you turn that feeling into learning. Language takeaway. Because this is the best time to grow your English, when your emotions are open and your imagination is active. We're going to look at some natural expressions that native speakers use in subtle, emotional moments. Then we'll write a simple story together. And finally, we'll speak it out loud together. That's how we learn deeply, from the inside out. Let's talk about language. There's a moment in the story when Claire says, "Everything became visible." She's not talking about something she saw with her eyes. She's talking about the truth, the kind of truth that has been there all along, just hidden. We say everything became visible when something finally becomes clear, emotionally or in a relationship. You might hear a friend say, "After the argument, everything became visible between us." Later, she says, "He didn't say anything, and that made it worse." This is something native speakers say when silence hurts more than words. Sometimes, not speaking can create more tension than shouting. Another line that stood out to many of you was, "He just gave me a look of quiet understanding." That phrase, quiet understanding, is beautiful. It means someone understands you but doesn't speak. There's no need to explain. It's often used to describe someone emotionally mature or deeply kind. There's also the line, "We went through the motions." It means two people are doing things, like cooking, cleaning, talking, but without emotion, like actors performing a script. You might hear, "My job became boring. I was just going through the motions." Then comes the one that gives me chills. "I started to disappear." This doesn't mean physically. It's about feeling unseen, not feeling important, slowly becoming someone others stop noticing. You might say, in that relationship, "I felt like I started to disappear. And finally, I chose quietly." That's one of my favorites. It means you made a choice, not with words, not with a dramatic moment, but gently, inside yourself. You didn't shout. You just moved on. It's a very emotional, powerful phrase. These are the kinds of expressions native speakers use when they're telling someone how they really feel. Not textbook English, real English. Now let's write. We're not calling this writing practice. No pressure. No perfect grammar. This is a writing challenge, but it's fun and short. I want you to take just 5 to 10 words or phrases we talked about and write a tiny story. Just 3 to 4 sentences. That's it. Let me show you a simple example. I've used a few of the expressions we just explored, but in a calm, everyday situation. Nothing dramatic or romantic, just a quiet moment that many of us have felt before. I walked into the office and smiled like always, but inside, I was just going through the motions. He looked at me with quiet understanding, like he knew I was tired. I didn't explain. I just chose quietly to leave early. Now it's your turn. Pick some of the phrases we've explored today and write your own 3 to 4 sentence story. It can be about a day at school or work, a moment with a friend or family member, a small decision you made silently. Type your story in the comments. You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest. This is how you train your brain to think in English, not just study it. We read every comment, and we love to see your voice come through. Now, let's speak. We've gone through vocabulary, we've written together, now it's time for your voice. Before we wrap up, I want to share 5 short scenes with you. Just a few lines each. These feel like real life, quiet conversations between 2 people, where meaning hides between the words. I'll read each scene with you and we'll pause together. As you listen and repeat, pay attention to how the emotion lives inside the rhythm. Let's begin. Scene 1. A quiet realization. A. You've been quiet lately. Everything okay? B. I'm just going through something. A. Do you want to talk about it? B. Not yet, but thank you for noticing. When someone says they're going through something, they don't always want to explain. It's a soft way to say, I'm struggling, but I'm not ready to share yet. We say this when we trust someone, but still need space. Scene 2. After a hard day. A. You look exhausted. B. Long day. Meetings, emails, small fires everywhere. A. Want to cancel tonight? B. No, I need something normal right now. That phrase, small fires everywhere, isn't about real fire. It's a casual way to describe a busy, stressful day full of little problems. Native speakers use it all the time, especially when talking about work chaos. Scene 3. Unspoken tension. A. Can we just sit for a minute? No talking. B. Sure. A. I know we haven't been okay lately. B. I know. We haven't been okay lately is a phrase full of emotion. It's quiet, but it means something deep has changed. We say this when the connection is fading, but we're not ready to give up. Scene 4. A personal boundary. A. I noticed you've been avoiding me. B. I've just needed space. A. Did I do something wrong? B. No, I just needed time to breathe. I've needed space is a respectful way to protect your own peace. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed, and this phrase lets us ask for distance without blame or drama. Scene 5. Moving on. A. So you're really not coming back? B. I don't think I ever fully belonged there. You could have said something. B. I did, just not with words. I did, just not with words. That's a powerful line. It means I showed you how I felt, even if I never said it out loud. Sometimes actions speak louder than language, and that is still communication. Now it's your turn. Go back and shadow each scene. Repeat the lines, feel the tone, live inside the silence. Then, if you're ready, write your own scene. Just 4 or 5 lines. Make it simple, honest, and real. Use phrases that mean something to you. You're not just learning English, you're learning how to speak from the heart. And that's what makes you powerful. Before you go, learning vocabulary is not about remembering lists. It's about hearing it, using it, and living with it. If this story helped you feel something and helped you learn something, leave a comment, give us a like, and share your writing. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to Speak English with Leo. We don't just teach English, we live it with feeling. Until next time, keep listening, keep writing, keep speaking with heart.